This chapter 30, dealing with European and American art in mostly the 18th century, creeping into the first part of the 19th century, it's a wonderful chapter in terms of what you learn about. And it's kind of a mess of a chapter, a beast of a chapter in terms of the organization. So the Rococo was clear enough because it focused on a very specific style, the Rococo style, related to the aristocratic class, primarily in Paris. Things get messier here because we jump around in terms of place and in terms of time. We go to Italy, we go to Britain, and as we do that, we're dealing with more than one style. And then we go to France, and it gets a little bit confusing and choppy. That's why I have found it helpful to break this very large mass of material down into smaller modules. And I'm going to be shifting a little bit some of our sequencing to try to make this a little bit more logical and clear for you. I'm going to keep the focus on France a little bit, which jumps ahead for a moment so that the timeline is clearer. Because the Rococo style was associated with Louis XV's reign, the aristocratic homes and salons of his time and after. So 1720, 1730, 1740s. I want to think kind of the mid-18th century prior to the French Revolution of 1789. So think around 1750s, 60s, 70s into the 80s. And I want to continue a little bit with painting at that time period so that you can get a sense of what there is at this time period besides the Rococo. So you've got your French painters that you already know, Boucher, Fragonard, and their followers. But then they tell you there's a strong reaction against the Rococo by the 1760s. A leading detractor of the Rococo was Denis Diderot, whose 32-volume Compendium of Knowledge and Skill, the Encyclopédie, served as an archive of Enlightenment thought in France. Diderot is massively important, and he allows us to think about the art being made in his time period from many angles. The tremendous versatility of Diderot's mind gives us a window onto the amazing creativity of the philosophers of the time, who were exploring all sorts of different domains of thought, from politics to nature to the nature of the human mind. So Diderot is a great example of how much such a person could accomplish. He wrote about the philosophy of mind in that he was interested in reason, which was being championed by philosophers of the Enlightenment, the idea that human beings possess the power of reason and that this power of reason is the basis for the idea that they ought to be free and self-determining creatures. Diderot, interestingly, also looked at feeling, the emotions, the sentiments, and his idea was that reason is not a king who should dominate over feeling, that the two should actually be reconciled together. He also tackled the most controversial religious topics of his time. In his world, Catholicism was an authoritative, even authoritarian political force, and no one was allowed to have religious dissent. Maybe a little bit if you're a Protestant, you're grudgingly allowed to, but nothing beyond that. Diderot is writing dialogues, imaginary dialogues turned into a manuscript about a debate between a deist, someone who believes in God, an atheist, someone who rejects God, and a pantheist, someone who perceives that the universe itself in its totality of living, changing organisms is the divine. This is very radical, and in fact, Diderot was oppressed and persecuted for these ideas. He actually had that manuscript seized by the police. At the same time, he's an accomplished scientist. He does studies of acoustics, of air resistance. He also, in fact, is thinking about how organisms reproduce and change, and has ideas about the flexibility of nature that actually scientists today, historians of science today, consider a kind of foreshadowing or forerunning of Darwin's concept of natural selection. Yet there were real costs to having the courage to express these ideas, because these ideas also had political implications. Diderot is arguing that the purpose of government should be for the common good, and at one point in his career, he is actually thrown in jail for his ideas. Diderot's most ambitious and wide-ranging project was his encyclopedia, Encyclopédie au dictionnaire raisonné, or reasoned, rationalized, a reasoned out dictionary of the sciences, the arts, et des métiers, the professions, in a sense, the technical knowledge, what we would today call technology. This was an attempt to assemble in a rational, systematic compilation all of the knowledge of the time that covered all of these domains of knowing. And it had articles by more than 100 contributors. It had tens of thousands of articles. Diderot himself wrote 7,000 of them and edited the other articles. We could call this the beginning of the information age. It is a seed that you could say will lead to the internet. So you have engravings showing the tools and the processes of performing activities such as a cobbler making shoes, scientific activities, as well as artistic activities. And it is actually in Diderot's ideas about how to understand art that he will also have a tremendously long-lasting influence.